the omnipresence of the hero's journey is incredibly damaging to boys and men. In many ways, the hero's journey is a teaching tale for the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I don't think in and of itself it's evil or bad. It's just not the whole story. When we have only one teaching story, then we're missing all of the other breadth and depth of human experience.
This episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 318 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined me for this particular episode. And if you are coming to us for the first time, or this is your first time listening, welcome. And I hope you'll take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing from my guest on this particular episode, Jason Frishman. And Jason is a social worker and a therapist up in Vermont. And we delve into this whole topic of work-life balance, parenting, and also fatherhood, which I don't know that we've talked specifically about fatherhood before on this particular podcast, but and I think part of it is the majority of therapists and counselors are women. Not to sound sexist or anything, but I think for men that are working in this field, there's maybe a little bit of a different journey, and particularly around just thinking about what it means to be a man and how cultural norms are kind of changing and some things that we can embrace. So looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Jason. I know we talk about just the importance of having community, which that is something that I have really found really important in my own journey. In particularly in the last several months, I've shared with those of you that have been listening for a while and earlier episodes of this year that back in November of this year, my wife passed away. And so I have been going through my own grief journey around all of that. And I've also got a series that I've started working on. It's a video series called Love and Loss. And you can find that over at practiceoftherapy.com/love and loss. It's just a video series that I put together just around my own grief journey. I'm overdue for adding some more videos, but we'll be getting to that hopefully here before long. But anyway, the other thing in my conversation with Jason is just the importance of having significant friendships and colleagues and people that we can connect with on a deeper level. And one of the things that that has helped me through my grief is just having a wonderful community around me. And so one of the things that I have kind of worked on over the last couple of years is really trying to build some more community around the practice of therapy and just build, having a private practice and having support from colleagues in the field. And I've done it several different ways, but this year I've kind of landed on a little bit different format. And shout out to my friend Whitney Owens over at Whitney Owens Consulting and her Wise Practice community. I really loved the model that she created. And that particular community is specifically for people that are wanting to have faith-based practices. And so I took her format and have just kind of applied it to my revamp of the practice of therapy communities. And in particular, I've started a membership community, and it's not quite launched yet, but you'll have a link here to kind of check it out and maybe get in on some early bird stuff. But anyway, I'm going to call it the Practice of Therapy Collaborative. And it is going to be a membership community that will meet every week. That's different for me. I've usually only met a couple of times a month, but planning on meeting every week, and we'll have different topics and different things that we'll cover each week. One week will be just some general office hours where we can mastermind together and talk about different things we're working on. Another week, I will just teach a lesson on a particular topic around private practice or private practice growth. Another week, we will have other experts that will join us. I'm going to draw in on my other friends in this whole private practice consulting community to lend their expertise to things. And then finally, we'll have a work day each month where you can come together and have some accountability and work on things specifically that you want to accomplish within your practice. So that's the outline of the format. Not sure exactly which order we'll do those things in yet, but going to work on that. But anyway, looking for this to launch in April. So I just wanted to kind of pull back the curtain on that. And also, if you're interested in working with me just individually, I also do that. For some people, ongoing membership community is not exactly what they're looking for, but really wanting something a little more intensive and short term. And so I do offer individual consulting, and you can find out about that along with the collaborative by going to practiceoftherapy.com/consulting. And I've revamped that landing page, so it's got all the updates there, and love to hear from you if you'd like to work with me. So without too much further ado, and before we get to Jason, I'd love for you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft Network, along with something from our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes.
Hey there. Are you searching for answers and clarity on your mental health journey? Well, I've got the podcast just for you. Welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, a podcast that's like having a heartfelt conversation with a trusted friend and who understands what you're going through. I'm your host, Steve Biesel, a therapist and proud member of the Psychcraft Network. Finding Your Way Through Therapy is a safe space where we openly explore the emotional complexities of mental health. From busting common myths to sharing actionable advice, we'll navigate this journey together through solo episodes as well as special guests. Discover your inner strength, resilience, and hope as we explore topics like self-care, building healthy relationships, cognitive behavioral therapy, and overcoming challenges. You'll come away with a renewed sense of self and the tools to create a life filled with fulfillment and well-being. So join me on Finding Your Way Through Therapy as we become your companion on this deeply personal journey. I am part of the Psychcraft Network and truly enjoy all the episodes. And back to your regular scheduled programming.
Have you ever wished your private practice could run as smoothly as a well-oiled machine? Well, look no further, because Therapy Notes is here to revolutionize your practice. Therapy Notes is the complete practice management system you've been dreaming of. With everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with clients remotely, create rich documentation, and handle insurance billing, it's your secret weapon for a smoother practice. And the best part? It's accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Yep, even on the go. Imagine having more time for what truly matters, your clients. It's like having an extra set of hands, but digital. And here's the kicker. It's the very EHR Gordon relies on in his own practice. So, you know it's the real deal. Say goodbye to paperwork nightmares and hello to more time and better quality care. Check out Therapy Notes today at practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes. Oh, and don't forget to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free. That's practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes with the promo code GORDON. Enjoy the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so glad for you to get to know Jason Frishman today. So thanks for joining us, Jason. I know that, Jason, you're located in Vermont, but as a start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Absolutely. One thing I'll start by saying is I'm from New York originally, via a lot of different places, including Georgia and New Hampshire and Massachusetts. But I've always wanted to be in Vermont. I was 12 years old and knew I wanted to live here. And so, many of my life streams have come to fruition. I say I live in Shangri-La. I'm a father of 2 boys, 15 and 12. I'm a partner of, my wife, Shauna, who's also a therapist, actually. And we live in rural Vermont outside of Burlington. And it's been certainly a long journey to get here, but it's been wonderful knowing everywhere I've ever trained or worked, I knew I was going to be here at some point. So it's really been lovely to live and set up my work and practice out of a place that I dreamed of becoming when I was a kid.
Right. It is a beautiful part of the country. It's been a while since I've been up that way. It's on my bucket list to get back to New England and Vermont and that whole area. So yeah.
Wonderful.
So
come on up. I'll cook you a meal.
Okay, I'd love that.
Wonderful.
So I know one of the topics we wanted to try to hit on today is really your niche and working with men and fatherhood and that sort of thing. So tell us how you kind of landed on that particular niche and kind of the work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I started out most of my career. I work, or actually, I don't want to say most anymore because I've been doing it longer than I like to think about. But the beginning of my career, I worked with kids, and I worked with generally boys almost exclusively, residential treatment centers, school-based work. And I'm embarrassed to say it slightly that when I was younger and doing this work with kids, I said, I'm only going to work with children. If you're an adult and you're still a jerk, it's too late for you. And I didn't always use that clean language either. And then, of course, as most therapists or anybody who works with kids knows, the more you work with kids, the more you have to work with adults. And then ultimately, and I loved working with boys. I really have a passion for sensitive boys, smart, sort of smart and sensitive kids who, as boys, we're socialized out of social connections, loving connections, sensitive, connections. And so when I had my own sons, I made a real intentional switch because I wanted to save my sort of kid energy for our community here, my kids and our friends and their kids. And so joyfully moved towards working with, sort of older teenagers, younger men, and then ultimately men and fathers became really the specialty that I love. And it's really been a powerful experience because for me, knowing how much our society, our culture forces, essentially bullies and systemically pushes sensitivity, emotions, caring out of the male experience. I really feel, I say a lot, but unfortunately, damaged men and boys become damaging men and boys.
Yes.
And so in addition to helping the individuals I really feel like the work that I'm doing is social action and social justice, which has always been
Hmm.
a really important part of my own values and the work I do. And so working with men, I can really live that. And
Yeah.
that's really how I found that.
Right, right. It's interesting, in some ways, as you describe it, I kind of have a parallel journey in that when I first went into this profession, I worked for a nonprofit that worked with at-risk
Mhm.
children and youth. And we did intensive in-home therapy. We were using a model called multisystemic therapy back at the time. And,
Mhm.
I thought, kind of like you, maybe a little bit opposite of you in that, you know, I knew I'd be working with some kids primarily. And I figured out at that time, I really didn't enjoy working with kids as much as I thought I would. But I
Yeah.
did know that, just through that work, that really where you make the biggest impact for kids is by working with the adults. In other words, you can spend time teaching kids skills and teaching them how to cope with things, but if the system around them, the adults around them are not doing their work, it really gets undone very quickly. And I think you're exactly right, is that we I think for those of us that are fortunate enough to have been raised in stable environments and have good parents and all of that sort of thing, we don't realize the damage it does down the road for, like you said, with the men that are trying to learn how to be fathers and really had none of it modeled for them, and not really, they're dealing with their own trauma.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is because now I work both as a psychotherapist and a men's coach. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
really seeing men along the entire spectrum of sort of, we'd say, clinical issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even men who had grown up with loving, intact families are finding,
Mm-hmm.
because our culture and sort of like the social narratives for men
Mm-hmm.
is damaging in and of itself. So if you grew up with an intact, loving family, you maybe have a couple steps up on things. But even men who grew up with loving fathers had messages that really pushed them from school, from media, from everywhere, that pushes us out of these loving connections that we so need as human beings.
Right, right. I was listening to a podcast this morning. I can't remember the title of it, but their guest on there was Esther Perel. All of us in this, field know about her. And she was just talking about, what makes people happiest are those relationships and connections we have. And if we don't
Mhm.
have good connections modeled for us, it really makes it difficult. And she was talking about, too, you might find this interesting, Jason. She was talking about how the culture has changed from the,
Mm.
like the early 1900s and even the 1800s, how men intentionally got together and had kind of like communities, either through clubs or, different societies and that sort of thing. And we don't have that as much anymore. It's so we just don't. Yeah.
I mean, I would say, not only do we not have that, we're actively discouraged from it. I
Mhm.
mean, I sort of joke about it, but there's an entire genre of film called a bromance where it makes fun of men wanting to have friends, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't ever find that about women. Women, the
Mm.
stereotype of getting together with your female friends and having a glass of wine or whatever it is, book
Hmm.
clubs. But I ran a men's group once where there was a father who came in and he was distraught. And he said, whenever I take my kids to the playground, I'm usually the only dad. Finally, there was another dad there. And for some reason, he looked interesting, but it was so uncomfortable to go and talk to him. I felt like I had to get his digits. Felt like I was dating. And yet it was
Hmm.
just talking to another guy. And so
Yeah.
not only are there not those kinds of social groups and social intentional kind of camaraderie, brotherhood, whatever we want to call it, but it's
Hmm.
actually, and there's been research that's shown it's intentionally and systematically being pushed away. We've seen research where boys as young as 2 and 3 will say, yeah, no, I like I'm friends with the girls, but don't tell the boys, because if that's the case, they won't let me play with them. And then
Right.
teenagers who have had close male friends the research shows that many teenage boys actively separate and distance themselves from other close male friendships. This isn't
Right.
natural. This isn't biological. This is
Yeah.
social.
Yeah. How do you think that how that's come to be? Why is that? Do you think that we've kind of developed that mentality and that kind of way of seeing things in our culture?
I mean, that's a huge question, and we could talk for a long time on that.
Mm-hmm.
The take that I really think is important about that, or the one explanatory piece that I think is really important, is we have a real dearth of social narratives that are models for us. So, have you heard of? I imagine yes, but have the hero's journey.
Yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
Right. So
Yeah.
most therapists, most people, have heard of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. I wrote my dissertation from the metaphor of the hero's journey, and I
Wow.
love it. And I would say that probably the first 15 years of my career, I designed interventions based on it.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth, right? The one
Mm-hmm.
story. And yet, I also am trained in narrative therapy. And narrative
Mm-hmm.
therapy, one of our foremost sort of tenets is to question taken for granted stories. So
Right.
even though I love Joseph Campbell, I love the hero's journey, I had to question it. I had to say, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
why is this?
Mm-hmm.
And in the last, let's say, 15 years of my career, I've really come full surface. And this is to answer your question. I think the omnipresence of the hero's journey is incredibly damaging to boys and men
Interesting.
because we don't
Mm-hmm.
have any other stories. And
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, the essence of the hero's journey is about might makes right. To the victor goes the spoils. Black
Mm-hmm.
and white thinking. The history is written by the winners. There's in many ways, the hero's journey is a teaching tale for the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I don't think in and of itself it's evil or bad. It's just not the whole story. It's not,
Yeah.
when we have only one teaching story, then we're missing all of the other breadth and depth of human experience. And when in doing research, I have found that in other cultures and other times, there have been other stories. There have been fairy tales that aren't just princes and kings and villains, right? And so again, I don't think that is the only reason we've come to this place in the culture, but I do think when I think about our social narratives, we have a paucity of them that it makes me sad. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we are such a creative people, humanity, and we can build better stories. We can tell better stories, and
Mm-hmm.
that can help us to create a more connected, partnered masculinity, fatherhood,
Yeah.
partnership. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that answers your question completely, but I do think
Yeah.
that has a
Yeah.
big part of it.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about because, I guess I'm always curious as to how we get to where we are and just thinking about,
Mhm.
okay, and then what directions can we go from there? So in your work with men and particularly maybe the groups, what, what sort of themes do you find people struggle with the most with their,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind really is presence and reactivity instead of responsiveness. I think those are the two that most men bring to me.
mm-hmm,
Is they are you know out in the world doing what men do at work, doing all those things, and then they come home and it's been incredibly hard for them to be present with their kids, with their partners, with their families. And then they're holding, stress and irritability and all of these things, and then they wind up being reactive. And that begins a shame or a guilt cycle. And then it goes to some depth. But I really
mm-hmm,
think that there's this, you know, difficulty of being present and of mindfully responding as opposed to reacting. And in many ways, I'm sort of I think in stories a lot, so that brings it back again to the hero's journey. Again, what's the hero's journey is to be epic and legendary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if men don't see them, not everyone is a hero. Not everybody is off battling dragons. Some of us are slogging away, some of us. And so if we have minimized and stigmatized the magic of everyday mundane life, then we always feel lacking and we always feel less
Mm-hmm.
than and we always feel not good enough. And so I think that this experience within my groups and in the working with fathers and men that I do, there's this allow this encouragement in the community that we have of finding meaning and value in the most mundane everyday things.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of exploring that. We do a lot of also the what gets in the way of that. So what are our patterns and what are our own stories that for struggle. So those are,
Yeah.
irritability, anxiety, those a lot of the typical things that I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of men bring to therapy, but we get to do it a little more creatively.
Right. Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what are some of the I guess maybe for lack of a better word, techniques or skills or methods that you use in teaching all of this?
Yeah. Well, to go back, so again, like I've said, I think the program that I use that I have is called JourneyMen, and
Mm-hmm.
it is I often say it's the answer or the other half to the hero's journey. And so what we're doing is we're building and writing foundational adventures, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
new stories that are not epic and legendary, they're foundational. So, for example, as you probably know, therapists and coaches, we like acronyms. And so the four sort of pillars or foundations of the work that I do with men, it actually spells men's, and that's been really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I talk a lot about the in and the out breath of men's work, right? The in breath
Mm-hmm.
is looking at myself and really understanding me. The out breath is the social relational component. And so MENS. M is mindfulness. So I teach a lot of mindfulness practices and not just mindfulness meditation, but really mindfulness, right? The awareness of
Mm-hmm.
one's own mind and experience. I have one technique that I actually built with my 12-year-old son, which was really
Mm-hmm.
lovely. And I share it with all my clients. So the first M is mindfulness. E is experiences or experiential. So the idea of taking action, right? Like know where you're at and then do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
The N is nourishment. I'm also in other parts of my life, I'm a cook and a food educator. And so a lot of food metaphors show up, but nourishment, not just food, but whatever nourishes and fills us up, both in and out breath. And then fortunately, men's is spelled with an S at the end
Mm-hmm.
because you couldn't get to this S without doing the first three. Mindful
Mm-hmm.
experiences, nourishment, and the last S, as I alluded to before, is social action, social responsibility. And
Mm-hmm.
so the idea of if I know myself, if I know what to do, and I can fill myself up, I have a responsibility as a man to go do something
Mm-hmm.
and to work to make the world a better place. And so I even start where I say connected fathers are social activists, even if you're doing it
Mm-hmm.
just at home, right? Because we're
Yeah.
helping our kids be better humans. And so everything is around those four pillars: mindful
Mm-hmm.
experience, nourishment, and social action. And then we'll do, for my narrative work, we do a lot of externalization, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's all within the metaphor of a journey and an adventure. And
Mm-hmm.
so but it's a foundational journey. So instead of dragons, we work on imps. And so we
Mm-hmm.
externalize our inner imps and get to know them. And, rather than the medical model of killing, cutting out, or banishing from the kingdom, we're going to educate, we're going to join, we're going to tame or train, we're going to help the men with their imps understand how maybe they could actually join us and maybe they could be in
Mm-hmm.
service to the work we're doing. And then the last, or not the last, but the other thing I would add is, in addition to the imps, since we're on a journey, I have each of our guys, they build what I call a values compass. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we've got lots of values and and our values are often very vague and ethereal and big, I have them really look at what are active, specific values for the goals they're working on in this particular journey. And they pick
Yeah.
four, like a compass, right?
Yeah.
And we do a lot of practice with the compass. I tell them, like a real compass, it only works if three things happen. You have to have correctly labeled, points of, the points on the compass. If they're not labeled well, you're lost.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know how to use it, which is what we teach. And you have to take it out of your pocket and look at it more often,
Yeah.
right? If you don't,
Yeah.
you're lost. And so with their values compass, with their trusted, imps now in a new relationship, the men that I work with traverse this adventure of home where they get to practice and they get to, you know, work on their connections with themselves, with other men, with their children, with their partners. And the last thing I would say about it is it turns a lot of the model on its head. Most men's work uses the hero's journey, right? Let's get
Mm-hmm.
together, let's go do something. We get the treasure and we go home and we're better for it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, your adventure is at home.
Yeah.
Your adventure is with your family. So the metaphor for journeyman is that I get to host a virtual inn. I get to be an innkeeper. It's what I've always wanted to be
Mm-hmm.
anyway. And what is with an inn is men get to come in and drop their shoulders and be real
Mm-hmm.
and say,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, you got to hear what happened on the trail today. Or, and why do people go to an inn? They go to share stories, get nourishment, to fix their equipment or get a new quest or find a new map or,
Mm-hmm.
get information from the shady guy in the corner. And this is we allow a space that is a warm and cozy inn for men
Mm-hmm.
to gather, similar to what you were mentioning, in days of old, is they can
Mm-hmm.
gather and be safe and connect. And then they go off into the dangers of their world, the
Mm-hmm.
adventure, and come back and reconnect. And so that's that in a very big nutshell. That's a lot of the work we
Yeah.
do. And it's been
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And as you were describing all of this, one thing that came to mind for me, I guess, well, two things. One, it's being able to teach people the difference between an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control, which goes back to what
Perfect.
you were saying about teaching people to respond to things rather than to react to things. And I think
Absolutely.
that's a huge game changer for people in that sense. The other thing I was reminded of, Jason, is there's a little bit of story about myself. I can
Great.
remember I guess I was in maybe my 40s or, late 30s, early 40s. And I remember being together with our family, was with another couple of families, and we were in one of them's living room, and the kids were young enough to where, you know, they were kids, they were probably, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. But we were playing music together and, singing, and the kids had gotten out their band instruments and all their stuff. And we were just cutting up and having fun. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of emotion in that, and recognizing, okay, life just doesn't get any better than this. In other words, that
Mm-hmm.
being so what, however I did, I'm not sure, but I was totally present in that moment. And I think when we can do that, that's when it's a whole game changer for people.
That's the treasure.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful. And yeah, I think that is, as we're working with men to be able to find that and see that and know that. And, they're little
Mm-hmm.
things. I
Right.
share with a lot of the guys, I have a PDF of the 10 fastest ways to connect with your kids. And
Mm-hmm.
all of them are long term. But if you did
Mm-hmm.
all 10 of them in one day, it would take less than 10 minutes.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
and it's about being present, about really knowing that, Like we're in this for the long term together. Like we're
Uh-huh.
in this.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, Jason, this is great stuff, and I've got to be respectful of your time. Any parting thoughts, and also tell folks how they can get in touch with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, well, sure. I guess the parting thought that I would say is that, while I focus on men and fathers, I really think we all can benefit from seeing life as stories and actively seeking to tell our own stories and challenging the
Mm-hmm.
ones that come that are just sort of foisted upon us. And so,
Yeah.
I think that's a really, like, whomever you are, if you can notice the stories that are being put upon you and challenge them and really to be, an agent in your own story, there's nothing better than that. And in terms of reaching out, the first thing I would say is at this point, Journeyman is just me. So if anyone reach out, you'll hear from me directly. I'm on most active on LinkedIn, but I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. I can give you all those links, so that can be
Yeah.
there. And
Uh-huh.
the simplest would be Jason at nourishedconnections.com. That's
Okay.
my direct email, and would love to hear from people.
Well, Jason, this has been a fun topic, and I appreciate you being on the podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to have more conversations in the future.
Oh, that would be lovely, Gordon. I'd love to do more. That'd be great.
Well, big thanks to Jason for joining me on the podcast, and I hope that you found this conversation that I had with him as meaningful as I did. I know, as I might have shared in this particular episode, I have a group of guys that I get together with regularly, usually on most Sunday afternoons. You can find us sitting on one another's porches. We just kind of rotate around and we share some good craft beer, and we've been known to smoke a cigar too. So some of my poor vices there. But again, that is such an important community to me because we talk about just some really meaningful stuff, just what's going on in our lives, things that we struggle with individually. And it's kind of almost like a mini group therapy session, but not really that, because we have a lot of laughter and fun and get a little bit rowdy sometimes. But anyway, thanks again to Jason for being on the podcast. And you can find out more about him by going to his website, JourneyMenFoundation.com. And we'll have links here in the show notes and the show summary so you can find that easily. And also, just speaking of community, if you're interested in bonding with some other therapists and getting some ongoing support with your practice, I'd love for you to check out this private practice collaborative that I'm putting together. Again, I'm changing the format. I've done some group consulting in the past, but I'm hopefully upping my game here by making it a little more intensive and meeting every week. And so with a specific format. So be sure to check it out. And you can also find out about just consulting with me individually by going to practiceoftherapy.com/consulting. And you'll find out about those two different ways to connect with me if you're interested. And also, big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice. As I've said before, I'm constantly impressed with all of the things that they're adding and just making it much easier to run the whole clinical side of my practice. So be sure to check it out. Go over to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes and use that promo code, just Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. So be sure and check them out. And thanks again for joining me for this particular episode. Do take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. And also, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and most of the social media places. And big thanks to Rachel, my virtual assistant, who runs all of that for me and helps me keep organized with the social media. So take care, folks. Looking forward to being back with you again next week. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.